I voted against the war in Iraq because I listened very carefully to what President Bush and Vice President Cheney had to say, and I didn't believe them. And if you go to my website, berniesanders.com, what you find is not only that I helped lead the opposition to that war, but much of what I feared would happen, what I spoke on the floor of the House, in fact, did happen in terms of the instability that occurred. So I believe, as president, I will look very carefully about unintended consequences. I will do everything I can to make certain that the United States and our brave men and women in the military do not get bogged down in perpetual warfare in the Middle East.
If I could just respond. Two points. One, Senator Sanders voted in 1998 on what I think is fair to call a regime change resolution with respect to Iraq, calling for the end of Saddam Hussein's regime. He voted in favor of regime change with Libya, voted in favor of the Security Council being an active participant in setting the parameters for what we would do, which, of course, we followed through on. I do not believe a vote in 2002 is a plan to defeat ISIS in 2016. It's very important we focus on the threats we face today and that we understand the complicated and dangerous world we're in.
Lynda Tran, let me ask you about that. What's the takeaway there?
I mean, look, I think we knew from the beginning that when the conversation turned to foreign policy, that this was going to be when Hillary Clinton really shined. And I think that that whole exchange was probably one of her strongest moments of the night. In particular, she was calling him out for answering a question about today's foreign policy challenges, again, by reiterating his vote on Iraq in 2002. What we didn't see in this clip is how she goes on to talk about specifically how she would address various issues that we're facing as a country right now. It is clearly a place where she's highlighting her experience as Secretary of State and showcasing that she understands how to tackle problems that are taking place right this second.
Leslie, from the Republican perspective, let me ask you, I know you're sitting there with Steve Chigueras in South Carolina. Hillary Clinton's foreign policy experience certainly is a vast contrast to Senator Sanders there. What did you see in some of her answers tonight regarding foreign policy specifically? Any potential vulnerabilities there?
You know, it's interesting, just the juxtaposition of the two of them. I thought, I would agree with Lynda, it was actually one of her strongest suits. She had a better command of the issue. She certainly had a lot of bandwidth to cover her time in the administration, which is really the high mark. They can be perceived high mark. I think you're going to get, especially in a state like South Carolina, when it does come to the contrast with Republicans, it's all the issues of Benghazi. It's all of the issues of the email, the email national security lapses and the scandal there. It's going to bring in another kind of pall over all her national security bona fides. But overall, I think in the context of this debate, it was her strong suit.
I want to point out, too, by the way, that the strengths of Hillary Clinton right now, foreign policy, having been the Secretary of State, and the fact that she has all this experience, these aren't necessarily the things that Democrats are looking for right now, at least based on the polling we've seen out of Iowa and New Hampshire. Unfortunately for her, what Democrats want is somebody who can speak to these issues of the economy and income inequality. You look at national security, it's way down on the list of priorities for Democrats. So while it may be one of her strongest points, it's not something that Democrats are really looking for right now in a candidate.
Yeah, you mentioned the experience issue. In fact, that was raised by Senator Sanders himself. Let's take a listen to that.
There is no question, and Secretary Clinton and I are friends, and I have a lot of respect for her, that she has enormous experience in foreign affairs. Secretary of State for 4 years. You got a bit of experience, I would imagine. But judgment matters as well. Judgment matters as well. And she and I looked at the same evidence coming from the Bush administration regarding Iraq. I led the opposition against it. She voted for it. But more importantly, in terms of this Libya resolution that you've noted before, this was a virtually unanimous consent. Everybody voted for it. wanting to see Libya move toward democracy. Of course, we all wanted to do that. That is very different than talking about specific action for regime change, which I did not support.
Look, I think it's important to look at what the most important counterterrorism judgment of the first 4 years of the Obama administration was, and that was the very difficult decision as to whether or not to advise the president to go after bin Laden. I looked at the evidence. I looked at the intelligence. I got the briefings. I recommended that the president go forward. It was a hard choice. Not all of his top national security advisors agreed with that. And at the end of the day, it was the president's decision. So he had to leave the Situation Room after hearing from the small group advising him, and he had to make that decision. I'm proud that I gave him that advice, and I'm very grateful to the brave Navy SEALs who carried out that mission.
All right, let's get thoughts on that and final thoughts as well on the Dems. Lynda, let's start with you.
Yeah, look, you know, Steve's right that as we look at exit polls from the first 2 states, it's very clear the Democrats are very concerned about economic issues and income inequality, the very things that Bernie Sanders has been hammering home. However, what Hillary Clinton was able to do tonight by talking with great depth and with great detail and expertise about foreign policy is to showcase where some of his weaknesses are. At the same time, she was able to, in detail, discuss some of the things she was able to accomplish as part of the Obama administration, which again is playing to this Obama coalition that she knows she needs to shore up in the coming states and that she knows that Bernie Sanders has got to make a play for. So overall, I think it was a pretty strong night for her.
Steve, what about you? Final thoughts?
Yeah, so my thoughts on the foreign policy part of this is, you know, here's the biggest challenge for Hillary Clinton right now, and it seems as if, and we've only got 2 states that have the evidence here, Iowa and New Hampshire, but it really seems as if this is anti-establishment sort of mindset, at least we know definitely within the Republican Party, but also within the Democratic Party, right? And so if this is really where the Democratic Party is right now, if it's anti-establishment, it almost doesn't matter what you've done in the past. And this argument that, you know, here's how I stand with President Obama, and here's what I did when I was Secretary of State, that is going to be the hurdle she has to clear to convince Democratic voters that she can bring change moving forward. Again, there's only 2 states that have evidence of this right now, but it seems as if there is an anti-establishment feeling among Democrats, and Bernie Sanders has really tapped into that, and that really, to me, seems to be what her biggest challenge is moving forward.
Leslie?
You know, I thought that the stark difference was between the anti-war, like we're repeating 2008 primaries all over again, and then the pivot to Osama bin Laden, which was pretty much lauded on both sides of the aisle as a very strategic, smart, decision that used a lot of evidence. It's interesting to hear her now, Secretary Clinton talking about, well, my advice to the president was this, in contrast to what we know was Vice President Biden's, advice to do the contrary, but use your best judgment. So I think in that case, again, she's trying to thread the needle to say that, yes, I took those positions, and I understand the anti-war movement within the Democratic Party, but I can still be strong on national security. It's a very tough position to be in, but I think it uses the best of her capabilities in this primary. And again, even if you look at the Republican exit polls, terrorism was very low, again, trumped by the issues of job growth and the economy. So it's one of these critical issues. You'll hear a lot more about it on Saturday, though, with the Republicans.
All right, our thanks to all 3 of you. Lynda, I know you have to go. Lynda Tran, CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. Thank you so much for your insight tonight.